There is some new information out from the National Transportation Safety Board regarding September's deadly float plane crash off Whidbey Island, which sadly claimed the lives of 10 people. And I am grateful to get the update. I am joined by the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Jennifer Homendy. Chair, thanks for joining us. Now, I looked at the update to the report. I know it's not a final conclusion in the investigation, but it seems that it's focused on the horizontal stabilizer actuator and a missing part that might have prevented some parts within the actuator from coming apart. What can you tell me about that part of the investigation, where that's focusing now?
And for your listeners, so the trim jack actuator is a jack screw which controls the horizontal stabilizer. And that's the small wing on the tail of the plane. And what that does is control the pitch or the up and down moments of the airplane, which is why it's so significant. When you have a trim jack actuator that is unscrewed, the pilot would no longer be able to control the position of this wing and could potentially result in a loss of nose up, nose down pitch control. And so with this situation, we had a jack screw or trim jack actuator that was unscrewed, and it could be that it was not put together, that it came apart somehow, or it was not fully together. And what we mean by that is this lock ring may have not been present to fully lock it in place, or the lock ring itself wasn't in completely.
So again, I know that it's too early to make a final conclusion, but are we now, is the investigation now honing in on this unscrewed trim jack actuator and the missing lock ring?
Yeah, so we are focused on a number of areas in this investigation, everything from company operations to oversight of the company to other components of the plane, the wreckage itself. Certainly, we're looking for the service history, the maintenance records, meteorology, and we're looking at aircraft performance. But in this situation, we identified this as a potential serious problem. And what we want to make sure is that we get information out to the companies that are operating the 65 DHC3 otters in the United States, that they take immediate action to look at the trim jack actuator, make sure it is properly screwed in place, and that the lock ring is in the lock ring groove, and that the pin is properly in the hole. Otherwise, we could end up with another tragedy just like this one.
And we certainly hope those are avoided. And there are a lot of these planes, float planes, and similar style float planes operating around the country. With that in mind, they might not all be the exact same model, but should other float plane operators that aren't necessarily of the same model be taking a similar look at their stabilizers?
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult for us to say because it's not something we're looking at. However, if this is something that is, in this case, with this plane, the company does an overhaul of this particular actuator before the season starts, so each spring. And we want to make sure that if this is something that companies are taking apart and putting back together, that you're paying attention and making sure it is put together and operating correctly. In this case, Viking Air Limited, which is the Canadian company that manufactured these planes, they will be issuing a service letter to all those who own and operate these planes to take immediate action. And we are encouraging all of those companies to take that action before they're flying other passengers.
Now, this might be a question you can't answer or can't fully answer, but this new update also indicates that the part that came unthreaded and was missing the locking ring also had 5 holes drilled in it that would have accepted the ring, and possibly, I believe, the pin is where what the hole would be for, and that 3 of them were damaged. Is this a common thing in these parts? I mean, does this seem like it's more unusual in this case that there were so many holes drilled in? I mean, that seems to me like that could be a clear, not a clear indicator, but at least an early indicator of the problem.
Well, that's something we do have to look at as when we start reviewing the service records and talking to the operator. Right now, what we did is we identified this as a problem in our review in the lab, and we wanted to get the information out, but now we'll look at uh, um, more information as it comes in from the operator. If it's a more widespread problem, we don't know that, but we want to make sure that if it is, that it's something that's looked at. One thing I do want to highlight for your listeners is they may be asking, did this occur in the crash? We know from the threads that if this occurred in the plane crash, that the threading would have been stripped. It would have been a pretty jarring force. So we know that did not occur in this particular crash. And that's why we're asking the companies to take immediate action to make sure that the assemblies are put together and back together and secured correctly.
Okay, so Chair Homendy, you touched on it a little bit already. What steps can you outline that remain in the investigation before we come up with a final conclusion on what caused the crash?
Yeah, so the great part about our process and investigations, it's a very inclusive process during our fact-finding portion of the investigation. There are two really big portions of our investigation. There's the fact-finding part, and then there's the analysis. Right now, we're still in the fact-finding phase. So when we find something that's a serious safety concern, we want to get that out to the public, especially to the companies that own and operate these planes. But part of our process, which enables us to do this, is we work with the manufacturer, we work with the company, we work with the Federal Aviation Administration that has safety oversight of these operators to make sure that we are identifying some of these issues, that we have all the facts. Once that's completed, when we have all the factual information, which it would include, for example, in this situation, all the service history, all the maintenance records. Once we have all that, we will move on to the analysis phase to really start to focus in on the probable cause and the contributing factors. And to do that, we do that alone. That's our independent authority. And that will come later on in the process once we have all the documentation.
So safe to say then we are still looking at the 12 to 24 month timeline before we come up with an answer.
Yeah, we'll see on that. Could be less. We'll see. Right now, we have the authority and often use it when we identify a serious safety issue like this one. We get it out as fast as possible. This is why we don't wait until something is issued. And this is a perfect example of that.
Okay, then I think probably the most important question here is, should people who might be considering flying on one of these planes go into it with some caution, or are you confident that by sending out this alert that the other operators will be able to double check, make a quick change, and make sure everything's okay?
Well, from our standpoint, given the seriousness of this issue, we would want all the companies that are operating these planes to take immediate action to do an inspection before they are transporting either the crew or their passengers. Pilots are operating. We want to make sure that action is taken to conduct the inspections before that occurs.
So no move to temporarily ground this particular model of plane then?
The NTSB does not have the authority to do that. That is the authority of the Federal Aviation Administration. The NTSB itself investigates accidents and significant events, but and then we issue safety recommendations and get out information to prevent such a tragedy from occurring again. But with respect to whether it's grounding or a requirement or some sort of directive, that has to come from the Federal Aviation Administration.
All right, very good. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy. Chairman, thanks so much. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ryan.